There is something strange about the human mind. We like to believe that we think carefully, that we examine the facts, weigh our options, and then make decisions based on reason. We imagine ourselves as rational observers, calmly looking at the world and choosing what makes the most sense. But the reality is far more complicated. Every day, without realizing it, your mind takes shortcuts. It fills in missing information. It searches for patterns. It remembers certain experiences more vividly than others, and sometimes it convinces you that a decision was rational only after you have already made it. The most interesting part is that you rarely notice any of this happening. You simply experience the final thought. You feel that something is right, so you move toward it. You feel that someone cannot be trusted, so you keep your distance. You remember one painful experience and suddenly become cautious about an entire category of people or situations. You see someone succeed and assume you understand why they succeeded. You hear an opinion repeated often enough, and eventually it begins to feel like a fact. Your mind does all of this quietly, efficiently, and often without asking for your permission. And this is where our journey begins. This is not a story about being irrational. It is a story about something much more subtle. The hidden ways in which an otherwise intelligent mind can distort reality. Because the human brain was not designed simply to discover the truth. It was designed to help us survive, react quickly, make predictions, recognize danger, conserve energy, and navigate an uncertain world. Those abilities are extraordinarily useful, but they come with a price. Sometimes the shortcut that helps you make a decision is also the shortcut that leads you toward the wrong one. Sometimes confidence feels like knowledge. Sometimes familiarity feels like truth. Sometimes emotion disguises itself as logic. And sometimes the greatest obstacle between you and a better decision is not a lack of intelligence, information, or experience, but the invisible machinery inside your own mind. In the chapters ahead, we will explore the patterns that shape the way we interpret people, situations, opportunities, risks, success, failure, and even ourselves. We will look at why our judgments can become distorted, why certain mistakes feel so convincing while we are making them, and why simply knowing that a bias exists does not always protect us from falling into it. The goal is not to distrust every thought you have. It is not to become cold, skeptical, or endless. The goal is something more useful. It is to become a little more aware of the machinery behind your thoughts, so that when your mind reaches a conclusion, you can pause for a moment and ask a simple question. Is this what is actually happening, or is this simply the way my mind has learned to see it? So, take a moment, set aside the noise of the day, let the world become a little quieter. And as we begin, remember that the most fascinating thing we are about to examine is not the behavior of other people. It is the mind you have been using to understand them. Welcome to the art of thinking clearly. Chapter 1: The Stories Your Mind Creates. Before we can understand why people make poor decisions, we first need to understand something much closer to home. The way the mind creates a story around everything it experiences. The world does not arrive in your consciousness as a perfectly organized collection of facts. Instead, you receive fragments. A look on someone's face, a sentence spoken in a certain tone, a memory from yesterday, a feeling in your stomach, a piece of information you heard years ago, and 1,000 other small signals are constantly entering your awareness. Somehow, your mind has to turn all of those fragments into something that makes sense. And that process happens so quickly that you rarely notice it. You do not experience yourself as someone constructing an interpretation of reality. You simply experience reality itself. Imagine that you walk into a room and notice two people speaking quietly in the corner. One of them looks in your direction, says something to the other person, and both of them laugh. In a fraction of a second, your mind may begin writing a story. Perhaps they were talking about you. Perhaps they were laughing at something you said earlier. Perhaps they noticed something embarrassing about you. Or perhaps they were simply discussing something completely unrelated, and their laughter had nothing to do with you at all. The important point is that you do not begin with certainty. You begin with incomplete information, and then your mind fills in the gaps. This ability is one of the reasons human beings are able to function in a complicated world. If we had to consciously analyze every single piece of information before responding to it, ordinary life would become almost impossible. We would spend minutes deciding whether a facial expression meant happiness or irritation, whether a familiar sound represented danger, or whether someone we had met before could be trusted. The brain saves enormous amounts of energy by making predictions based on previous experience. It looks at what is happening now and quietly asks, what does this remind me of? What usually happens next? What explanation fits what I already know? The problem begins when the explanation feels so convincing that we forget it is only an explanation. This is one of the most important things to understand about thinking clearly. Your mind does not simply observe the world, it interprets the world, and interpretation is never completely neutral. Your past experiences, expectations, fears, desires, habits, beliefs, and emotional state all influence what you notice and what you ignore. Two people can stand in exactly the same situation, hear exactly the same words, and walk away with completely different impressions of what happened. Neither person necessarily believes they are interpreting the event differently. Each simply feels that they saw the truth. Think about the last time someone misunderstood you. Perhaps you sent a message that you considered completely ordinary, but the other person interpreted it as cold or dismissive. Maybe you walked past someone without saying hello because you were distracted, and they interpreted your silence as arrogance. Perhaps someone gave you a short answer when you were speaking to them, and you immediately assumed they were angry with you. Later, you discovered that they were tired, distracted, worried about something else, or simply having a difficult day. The facts had not changed. What changed was the story surrounding the facts, and this happens constantly. A person does not reply to your message, and your mind supplies a reason. A colleague receives an opportunity you wanted, and your mind creates an explanation for why they received it. Someone criticizes your work, and suddenly you begin questioning their motives. Someone praises you, and you may decide that they finally recognize your value. In each situation, there is an observable event, and then there is the meaning you attach to that event. The two can feel identical, but they are not the same thing. Learning to separate them is one of the first steps toward clearer thinking. Consider how often you say things like, "They don't respect me. I'm just not good at this. People like that always behave this way," or "I knew this would happen." These statements sound like observations, but many of them are actually conclusions. They compress a complicated situation into a simple story. Once the story is established, your mind begins looking for evidence that supports it. The person who believes that others do not respect them may notice every interruption, every disagreement, and every unanswered message, while barely registering the moments when people listen carefully or offer genuine support. The person who believes they are bad at something may remember every mistake while forgetting the occasions when they performed well. The story becomes a filter. And once the filter is in place, reality begins to look like proof. This is where the mind can become remarkably convincing. It does not usually announce that it is manipulating your perception. Instead, it presents its interpretation in the same voice it uses for obvious facts. You know that the sun is rising. You know that the room is cold. You know that someone said a particular sentence. And then, without any obvious change in certainty, your mind tells you what that sentence meant, what the person intended, and what is likely to happen next. The facts and the interpretation arrive together, and because they arrive together, we often confuse them. There is another reason this happens. The mind strongly prefers coherence. We like events to have causes, people to have motives, and stories to have beginnings and endings. Randomness makes us uncomfortable. Uncertainty is mentally expensive. So when information is incomplete, the brain often prefers a satisfying explanation to an unresolved question. This can be useful. If you hear a strange sound in your house at night, assuming that there is a possible problem is more useful than simply deciding that nothing matters. If you have been hurt by someone before, remembering the experience can help you recognize similar warning signs in the future. Experience gives the mind patterns, and patterns can protect us, but patterns can also become prisons. Once the brain learns a pattern, it becomes easier to see that pattern again, even when the situation has changed. A person who has been betrayed may begin seeing betrayal everywhere. A person who has experienced failure may begin expecting failure before an opportunity has even begun. Someone who grew up believing that success requires constant struggle may unconsciously distrust anything that comes easily. Someone who has always been praised for being intelligent may begin avoiding situations where they might appear inexperienced, because protecting the identity of being smart becomes more important than learning something new. In each case, the mind is trying to protect a story about reality, and sometimes it is also trying to protect a story about. This is particularly powerful because human beings do not simply want to know what is true. We also want to feel that we understand who we are. We build identities around our memories and experiences. We tell ourselves that we are disciplined, independent, cautious, ambitious, unlucky, logical, creative, misunderstood, successful, or simply not the kind of person who does certain things. These descriptions can give life a sense of continuity, but they can also influence our decisions in ways we never consciously recognize. Suppose you think of yourself as someone who is always rational. When you make an emotional decision, you may be more likely to search for logical reasons afterward. You are not necessarily lying to yourself. Your mind is simply trying to preserve consistency between what you did and the person you believe yourself to be. The decision happened first, and the explanation may come afterward. This is why intelligence alone does not protect us from distorted thinking. In fact, intelligence can sometimes make the problem more complicated. A clever mind is very good at finding explanations. If you strongly want to believe something, your intelligence can help you construct an argument for it. You may find evidence, organize your reasoning, dismiss contradictions, and explain away inconvenient details. The result can feel extremely logical, even when the original conclusion was driven by emotion, identity, fear, or desire. Clear thinking, therefore, is not simply the ability to produce good arguments. It is also the ability to question the assumptions that came before the argument, before asking, "Can I prove that this is true?" It is often more useful to ask, Why do I want this to be true? That question can feel uncomfortable because it turns the attention inward. Instead of examining the world, you begin examining the person doing the examining. You begin to notice that your judgments are influenced by things you would rather believe were irrelevant. You discover that the opinion you defended so confidently may have been connected to your pride. You notice that your anger may have changed what you considered reasonable. You realize that your fear may have made one possible outcome feel much more likely than it actually was. None of this means that your thoughts are worthless. It means they deserve examination. The goal of clear thinking is not to eliminate intuition, emotion, memory, or personal experience. Those things are essential parts of being human. The goal is to understand when they are helping you see more clearly and when they are quietly shaping the picture for you. One of the simplest habits you can develop is to create a small distance between what happened and what you think it means. When something triggers a strong reaction, pause long enough to separate the event from your interpretation of it. Ask yourself what you actually know, what you are assuming, and what you might be adding because of your previous experiences. You may discover that the situation is still exactly as serious as you first believed, or you may discover that your mind had turned a small uncertainty into a complete story. That pause is small, but it can change everything. Because once you recognize that your first interpretation is not necessarily reality, you gain something extremely valuable: the freedom to consider another explanation. And sometimes another explanation is all you need to make a better decision. The person who seemed disrespectful may have been distracted. The opportunity that seemed impossible may simply require a different approach. The failure that felt like proof of your inability may actually reveal a skill you still need. The criticism that felt like a personal attack may contain information that could make your work better. The person who seemed completely different from you may simply have grown up with experiences you never had. The world becomes more complicated when you stop assuming that your first story is the only story. But strangely, it can also become more interesting. You begin to look at people with a little more curiosity. You become more comfortable saying, "I don't know yet." And that simple phrase can be one of the most powerful tools in clear thinking, because sometimes the wisest response to incomplete information is not another conclusion. It is patience. Your mind will always create stories. That is what minds do. You cannot completely switch off the process, and you probably would not want to. The objective is not to silence the storyteller inside your head. It is to remember that the storyteller is not the world itself. The story is only the mind's attempt to make sense of the world. And once you understand that distinction, you are ready to examine the next problem: the ways in which your mind can become attached to the stories it has already created, defending them even when new evidence begins to appear. Because seeing reality clearly is one challenge. Changing your mind when reality proves you wrong is another. Chapter 2: The Illusion of Clear Thinking. Most people believe that clear thinking means having more information. They imagine that if they can read another article, watch another explanation, gather another opinion, or spend a little more time analyzing the situation, the right answer will eventually reveal itself. But the human mind does not work that way. More information does not automatically create better judgment. Sometimes, it simply gives confusion more material. Think about the last time you had an important decision to make. Perhaps you were choosing between two opportunities, deciding whether to trust someone, considering a major change in your life, or simply trying to understand why something had gone wrong. You probably told yourself that you needed to think about it carefully. So you gathered information. You compared possibilities. You imagined different outcomes. You replayed conversations in your head. You asked yourself what you should have done, what you could have done, and what might happen if you chose one path instead of another. And yet, after all that thinking, you may have felt no closer to an answer. This is one of the great paradoxes of the human mind. We can spend hours thinking without actually thinking clearly. The problem is not always a lack of intelligence. In fact, intelligent people can sometimes become trapped more easily because they possess greater mental ability to construct explanations for whatever they already believe. The mind is remarkably good at creating stories that feel logical, even when those stories are built on incomplete information, emotional assumptions, or conclusions that were formed long before the reasoning began. We like to believe that we first observe reality, then analyze it, and finally reach a conclusion. But much of the time, the process happens in reverse. We form an impression quickly, often without realizing it, and then our conscious mind begins searching for reasons to support that impression. This is why two intelligent people can look at exactly the same situation and walk away with completely different interpretations. They are not necessarily seeing different facts. They are assigning different meanings to the same facts. Imagine that someone sends you a short message that simply says, "We need to talk," nothing else. Immediately, your mind begins working. Perhaps you assume something is wrong. Maybe you think the person is angry with you. Perhaps you start remembering something you said earlier in the day, searching for a possible mistake. Another person might receive the exact same message and assume that something important but completely harmless needs to be discussed. The message has not changed. Only the interpretation has changed, and that interpretation can influence everything that happens next. If you believe the person is angry, you may become defensive before the conversation even begins. If you believe you have done something wrong, you may become anxious and apologetic. If you believe nothing serious is happening, you may approach the conversation calmly. The same external event produces different internal realities because the mind does not simply process information. It interprets information. This is why learning to think clearly begins with understanding that your first interpretation is not necessarily the truth. It is only your first interpretation. That distinction is simple, but it is extraordinarily powerful. We often experience our thoughts as if they were direct reflections of reality. When the mind says, "They don't respect me," it feels like an observation. When it says, "This opportunity will change everything," it feels like insight. When it says, "I always fail at this," it feels like memory. But thoughts are not reality. They are mental constructions created from memories, expectations, emotions, experiences, beliefs, and incomplete information. The mind takes fragments and builds a picture. And once the picture feels convincing, we tend to forget that we were the ones who constructed it. This becomes especially dangerous when emotion enters the process. Fear can make an uncertain situation appear threatening. Anger can make another person's behavior appear intentionally disrespectful. Desire can make a risky opportunity appear safer than it really is. Anxiety can transform a possibility into a prediction. And insecurity can turn a neutral event into evidence that something is wrong with us. The stronger the emotion, the more convincing the interpretation can feel. That is why clear thinking requires something more difficult than intelligence. It requires distance. You must be able to step away from your own thoughts long enough to examine them. Instead of immediately asking, "Is this true?" begin by asking, "Why does my mind believe this is true?" That question changes everything. because now you are no longer trapped inside the thought. You are observing the thought. Suppose you walk into a meeting and notice that two people stop talking when you approach. Your mind might immediately tell you that they were discussing you. Maybe they were. But perhaps they were talking about something completely unrelated. Perhaps they stopped because they realized the meeting was about to begin. Perhaps they were discussing something private that had nothing to do with you. You do not know. Yet the mind hates uncertainty, so it fills the empty space. It creates an explanation. And once an explanation exists, we often begin treating it as evidence. This is one of the most important habits to develop if you want to think more clearly. Learn to separate what you know from what you assume. What do you actually know? You know that two people were speaking. You know that they stopped when you arrived. Everything beyond those facts is interpretation. This may sound almost ridiculously simple, but applying it in real life requires discipline. Most people do not naturally separate observation from interpretation because the brain combines them automatically. We see an event, assign meaning to it, and experience the meaning as part of the event itself. Clear thinkers learn to slow down that process. They create a small space between what happened and what they think happened. That space is where better judgment begins. The same principle applies to the way we judge ourselves. Imagine making a mistake at work. You forget something important, perform poorly during a presentation, or make a decision that produces a bad result. The event itself is one thing, but the mind may immediately transform that event into an identity. I made a mistake becomes I'm bad at this. I failed this time becomes I always fail. This relationship ended becomes nobody will ever stay. A single event becomes a permanent conclusion. This is not clear thinking. It is emotional generalization. The human mind is constantly searching for patterns because patterns help us predict the future. But the desire to find patterns can become a weakness when we create patterns from too little evidence. One bad experience becomes proof. One rejection becomes a prediction. One betrayal becomes a theory about everyone. And once the theory is established, we begin noticing evidence that confirms it while ignoring evidence that challenges it. This is how the mind can quietly become its own echo chamber. You believe something, so you notice information that supports it. That information strengthens the belief, which makes you pay even more attention to similar information. Eventually, the belief feels undeniable, not because you investigated every possibility, but because your attention has been trained to notice only certain possibilities. Clear thinking, therefore, requires curiosity. Not the curiosity of collecting more facts, but the curiosity of questioning your own certainty. Ask yourself, what if I am wrong? Ask, what information would change my mind? Ask, what am I not seeing because I already decided what this means? These questions are uncomfortable because they challenge the ego. We like being right. We like having explanations. We like believing that our judgment is objective. But intellectual strength is not the ability to never be wrong. It is the ability to recognize when you might be wrong without feeling personally threatened by the possibility. The person who can change their mind when new evidence appears is not weak. They are adaptable. The person who refuses to change their mind simply because they have already committed to an idea is not necessarily strong. They may simply be protecting their identity, and this distinction becomes increasingly important as the complexity of life increases. There will always be situations where you do not have enough information. There will always be people whose intentions you cannot completely know. There will always be decisions whose outcomes cannot be predicted with certainty. Waiting for perfect certainty is therefore another form of confusion. Clear thinking does not mean eliminating uncertainty. It means learning how to make reasonable decisions while uncertainty remains. Sometimes the smartest conclusion is not, "I know exactly what is happening." Sometimes it is, "I don't know yet and I need more evidence." That sentence requires humility, but it also creates freedom. Because when you admit that you do not know, you no longer need to force reality into a story simply to make yourself comfortable. You can observe, you can wait, you can gather evidence, and most importantly, you can think again. The goal is not to silence the mind. The goal is to stop believing every thought the mind produces. Your brain will continue generating predictions, assumptions, fears, desires, memories, and explanations. That is what brains do. But you do not have to accept every one of them as truth. Between the thought and the decision, there can be a pause. And within that pause is the possibility of clarity. Chapter 3. Thinking clearly in a world that wants you distracted. There is a strange moment that comes when you begin to understand how easily the mind can be influenced. You start noticing the things you once accepted without question. You notice how quickly you react to a headline, how easily a confident voice can make an uncertain idea sound true, how a strong emotion can turn a small inconvenience into something that feels like a personal attack, and how often your first interpretation of an event feels so convincing that you never stop to ask whether it is actually accurate. The more you observe yourself, the more you begin to realize that clear thinking is not something that happens automatically simply because you are intelligent. Intelligence can give you the ability to process more information, but it does not guarantee that the information will be processed wisely. A brilliant mind can still be controlled by fear, pride, desire, anger, insecurity, and the simple human need to be right. And perhaps that is where real clarity begins. Not with the belief that you are rational, but with the humility to recognize how often you are not. The goal is not to become a person without emotion. That would be impossible and perhaps undesirable. Emotions are not enemies of thought. They are signals. They tell you that something matters. Fear may warn you of danger. Anger may tell you that a boundary has been crossed. Desire may reveal what you value. Sadness may show you what you have lost. The problem begins when the signal becomes the decision. When emotion speaks and you immediately obey. When fear says run and you never ask what you are running from. When anger says attack and you never ask what your anger is protecting. When desire says take it now and you never consider what taking it will cost you later. A clear mind does not silence emotion. It creates enough distance to listen without surrendering control. This is one of the most important differences between reacting and thinking. Reaction is immediate. Thinking creates space. Reaction asks, "What do I feel right now?" Thinking asks, "What is actually happening?" Reaction searches for confirmation. Thinking searches for understanding. Reaction wants an answer that feels satisfying. Thinking is willing to live with an answer that is uncomfortable but true. That difference may seem small, but over the course of a life, it can become enormous. Imagine two people receiving the same criticism. One immediately becomes defensive. He hears the criticism as an attack on his identity, so his mind begins constructing a defense before he has even understood what was said. He searches for the other person's flaws. He remembers every mistake they have ever made. He prepares a response that will restore his pride. The second person feels the same initial discomfort, but instead of reacting immediately, he pauses. He asks himself what part of the criticism is unfair, what part may be useful, and what part he simply does not want to hear. He does not automatically accept the criticism, but he does not automatically reject it either. That small pause gives him something incredibly valuable: choice. And choice is the foundation of clear thinking. The world around you is constantly competing for your attention. Every notification, advertisement, headline, argument, opinion, and dramatic story is asking your mind to move in a particular direction. Many of these things are designed not to make you think, but to make you react. Anger keeps attention. Fear keeps attention. Outrage keeps attention. Novelty keeps attention. The human mind is naturally drawn toward things that appear urgent, threatening, surprising, or emotionally charged. That tendency may once have helped us survive, but in the modern world, it can become a weakness, because not everything that demands your attention deserves it. Sometimes the most intelligent thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in the noise. You do not have to have an opinion about everything. You do not have to respond to every argument. You do not have to defend yourself against every misunderstanding. You do not have to immediately choose a side whenever two sides begin fighting. And you certainly do not have to turn every piece of information you encounter into a belief. There is power in saying, "I don't know yet." Those 4 words can be surprisingly difficult for an intelligent person to say. We are often rewarded socially for certainty. People who speak confidently can appear more competent than people who carefully acknowledge uncertainty. But confidence and accuracy are not the same thing. A person can be completely certain and completely wrong. Another person can be uncertain and still be much closer to the truth. Clear thinking, therefore, requires a different kind of confidence. Not the confidence to always have an answer, but the confidence to change your answer when better evidence appears. That is intellectual strength. The mind becomes dangerous when it starts protecting its conclusions more fiercely than it searches for truth. Once an idea becomes part of your identity, questioning the idea can begin to feel like questioning yourself. You stop asking whether the belief is correct and start asking how you can defend it. Evidence becomes something to use selectively. Contradictions become threats. People who disagree become enemies. And slowly, without noticing it, the antidote is curiosity. Curiosity allows you to examine an idea without immediately marrying yourself to it. It allows you to say, "What if I am wrong?" without experiencing that possibility as humiliation. It allows you to encounter an unfamiliar perspective without feeling obligated to either accept it or destroy it. You can simply observe it. You can study it. You can ask what it explains that your current perspective does not. This does not mean believing everything. It means becoming difficult to manipulate. A person who can tolerate uncertainty is harder to control than a person who desperately needs certainty. A person who can delay judgment is harder to deceive than a person who needs immediate conclusions. A person who can separate facts from interpretations is harder to provoke than a person who treats every interpretation as reality. And perhaps this is the deeper meaning of thinking clearly. It is not simply about making better. It is about becoming less vulnerable to the forces that make decisions for you. Your environment influences you. The people around you influence you. Your habits influence you. Your memories influence you. Your fears influence you. Your ambitions influence you. Even the stories you repeatedly tell yourself influence what you notice and what you ignore. You cannot completely remove these influences, but you can become aware of them. Awareness creates distance. When you become aware of your own patterns, you can begin to interrupt them. You can notice when you are making a decision because it is genuinely right for you, and when you are making it because you are afraid of disappointing someone. You can notice when you are pursuing something because you value it, and when you are pursuing it because you want other people to admire you. You can notice when you are defending a position because you believe it, and when you are defending it because admitting you were wrong would hurt your pride. These distinctions are subtle, but they matter, because a life can be shaped by decisions that feel insignificant in the moment. One impulsive purchase does not define your financial future. One angry response does not define your character. One distraction does not destroy your ambition. One poor decision does not ruin your life. But repeated decisions create patterns, and patterns eventually create outcomes. This is why thinking clearly is not a performance. It is a practice. You do not need to become perfectly rational. You only need to become slightly more deliberate than you were yesterday. Pause before responding. Question your first assumption. Look for evidence that contradicts what you believe. Separate what you know from what you assume. Give important decisions more time than unimportant ones. Notice what consistently triggers strong emotional reactions in you. Learn which environments make you think better and which environments make you impulsive. And when you discover that you were wrong, resist the temptation to feel defeated. Being wrong is not the opposite of intelligence. Refusing to learn from being wrong is. Over time, these small practices begin to change the relationship you have with your own mind. You stop treating every thought as a command. You begin treating thoughts as information. You notice the thought, examine it, and decide whether it deserves to guide you. That is a profound shift, because your mind will produce thousands of thoughts that you never consciously requested. Some will be useful, some will be irrational, some will be memories, some will be fears disguised as predictions, some will be desires disguised as necessities. Some will simply be noise. You are not required to believe all of them. You are allowed to let a thought pass. You are allowed to reconsider. You are allowed to change your mind. And you are allowed to slow down. In a world that constantly tells you to move faster, slowing down can feel like weakness. But sometimes slowing down is exactly how you regain control. A hurried mind is easier to influence because it does not have enough time to examine what is happening. Give yourself a few seconds and a different possibility may appear. Give yourself an hour and your emotional intensity may change. Give yourself a night and a problem that seemed enormous may look completely different in the morning. Time does not always solve problems, but time often reveals which problems were never as large as they felt. And perhaps that is the final lesson of clear thinking. You do not need to win every moment. You need to understand the direction of your life. A single decision matters, but the pattern matters more. A single mistake matters, but what you learn from it matters more. A single emotional reaction matters, but the habits behind your reactions matter more. You are building a mind every day, whether you realize it or not. Every idea you repeatedly entertain strengthens something. Every habit of attention shapes something. Every reaction you practice becomes easier to repeat. Every time you choose curiosity over certainty, patience over impulse, and reflection over reaction, you are training yourself to think differently. Eventually, the quality of your thinking becomes part of the quality of your life, not because clear thinking guarantees success. It does not. There will still be uncertainty. There will still be failure. There will still be situations you cannot control and outcomes you cannot predict. Sometimes you will make the best decision available and still get a bad result. Sometimes someone less thoughtful will succeed while you struggle. Sometimes life will simply be unfair. Clear thinking does not protect you from reality. It helps you face reality without constantly creating additional problems inside your own mind. And perhaps that is enough, to see the world a little more accurately, to understand yourself a little more honestly, to recognize the difference between what happened and the story you created about what happened, to know when to act, when to wait, when to speak, and when silence is wiser. To recognize that not every thought deserves belief, not every emotion deserves obedience, and not every opportunity deserves pursuit. The strongest mind is not the one that thinks the most. It is the one that knows what deserves to be thought about. So when you leave this chapter, do not try to remember every idea you have heard. Take only what is useful. The next time you feel yourself reacting too quickly, pause. The next time you become completely certain, become curious. The next time you feel threatened by an opposing idea, examine why. And the next time your mind tells you that something must be true simply because it feels true, give yourself permission to ask one simple question. What else could be happening here? That question may not give you an immediate answer, but it may give you something more valuable. It may give you space. And inside that space is where clearer thinking begins, because the world will always be noisy. People will always have opinions. Emotions will always rise and fall. Distractions will always compete for your attention. Your own mind will always produce thoughts that deserve examination. You cannot control all of that, but you can decide what you do with it. You can become the observer before becoming the reactor. You can become curious before becoming certain. You can become deliberate before becoming impulsive. And slowly, decision by decision, thought by thought, you can build a mind that is not easily pushed around by fear, noise, pressure, or illusion. A clear mind does not mean a perfect mind. It means a mind you are willing to understand. And perhaps, in the end, that is one of the greatest forms of freedom available to us. Not controlling everything that happens around us, but becoming more conscious of what happens within us. So think carefully, not because every decision is life-changing, but because every decision is teaching your mind what to do next. And the mind you build today will be the mind you carry into tomorrow.